After years of hard work, all he got was abandonment. Slow steps on the dirt floor, the sound of dry wind dragging leaves, and there, standing in the late afternoon sun, an old ox cart, forgotten, covered in dust and silence. Next to him, the ox, lean, tired, with eyes lost in time. This is not just a sad story, it's an open wound. It is a silent scream that echoes in the hearts of those who have felt the weight of ingratitude on their skin. He wasn't just an animal, it was strength. It was loyalty. He was the faithful companion on every difficult morning when the world was still dark and the boss was already asking for work. He was the one pulling the weight, who faced the mud, the heat, the thirst. And the boss, the one who one day said, "This ox is my partner." It was the same one who, in the end, turned his back and walked away without looking back. How many stories like this are repeated every day in the silence of the countryside, on farms forgotten by time? How many times is sacrifice ignored, and those who gave their all end up alone, tired, discarded? This story is about an ox cart that no longer runs, but most of all, it's about a broken heart that no one heard break. It's about the pain that doesn't scream, but that destroys inside. It's about who gave everything, and in the end, it was worth nothing. If you see it from afar, you might think it's just an old animal, it's just a piece of wood in the middle of the woods. But whoever listens with the heart, feel the weight of real life, feel the bitter taste of injustice, indifference, human evil disguised as normality. And how many of us have also been left behind? How many have felt the ground disappear after years of dedication to someone who didn't even care to say goodbye? This story is sad, but she is real, and it carries a lesson that touches the soul of anyone who has ever known abandonment. So, if you've ever been ignored after all your effort, if you've ever sacrificed yourself for someone you didn't even realize, if you believe that even the simplest being deserves respect, stay with me until the end of this video, because the story I'm going to tell you now isn't just about an ox. It's about me. It's about you. It's about all of us who have ever been treated like tools and then thrown away. But there's still more. And what comes next will touch where it hurts most, the soul of those who feel it. After years of being used, forgotten, left to fend for itself, the ox still carried a flame of dignity within it. That being that many saw only as strength to pull loads, to serve without question, had an entire story engraved in his veins, in his tired muscles, in his loin marked by life. From a very young age, he was taught how to work. He had no restful childhood. As soon as he learned to walk, he felt the weight of the rope, the cold of the morning, the mud that stuck to his hooves. His life wasn't made of games or light dreams. It was made of sweat, of sacrifice, of journeys that began before the sun rose and ended well after the heat was punishing. He already knew the pain of effort and toil. He carried firewood, pulled loads of corn, transported bags of flour, crossed dirt roads on rainy days or when the sun was scorching hot. It didn't matter if the road was difficult, muddy, tortuous. He followed it as if he had a purpose. After all, the boss was there, counting on him, trusting in his service. "This bull belongs to the house," the boss said at some point, and he believed in this trust like someone who believes in the sun that rises every day. For many summers, it endured scorching heat. I planted my feet on the dry earth, panting, staring at the impartial sky. During the winter rains, he faced mud that stuck to his hooves and left deep marks between the hair on his robust body. The dry throat, the belly that demanded food, the body that asked for shelter. He persisted because he knew that his value was there, in service, in delivery, in constancy. He saw the expression of his boss, who often passed by his side without looking into his eyes, but he knew that there was an invisible relationship of dependence and sacrifice there. He did the heavy work so that the boss could reap the rewards, make money, breathe in the profits. He carried the weight of dreaming for the other person too. It was as if every drop of his sweat watered the soil of other people's success. Over the years, the relationship between the ox and the boss walked like a rope stretched between two worlds. On one side, the ox, loyal, giving all its strength. On the other, the boss, who smiled at the harvests, at the sales, at the progress. Many times on silent nights, this ox felt a distant presence, footsteps in the yard, voices of planning, expansion plans, decisions made in the shadows, plans that never included a look of gratitude towards his faithful four-legged worker. And yet, he persisted. He persisted because inside him there was something greater than any pain, the conviction that every sacrifice was worth it. He believed that every load, every difficult path, every stumble in the mud made sense. He knew he wasn't just an ox. He felt it, he supported it, he gave it up. He was body and soul in the rustic labor of rural life, but inside, the wound was widening. The marks became deep scars. Strength faded over time. Loyalty, which had once been pride, became too heavy a burden for a tired body. He began to notice small changes. The boss's gaze was no longer looking for the ox. There were no more compliments, no more gestures of care. There was no longer any fresh water in the clean drinking fountain. There was no longer soft grass or rest on days off when there was a day off. The relationship of sacrifice turned into silent abandonment. On many sunsets, he would remain there, motionless, listening to the sound of the wind, feeling the distant thump of the wheels of his master's cart as it passed without stopping. The sound of the wheels echoed like a warning. You are no longer useful. He felt in his bones, in his loins, in his chest, the weight of this traitorous absence of care. He was becoming obsolete for someone who once said, "my companion." But even in this silent change, the ox continued to provide. He continued to pull, to resist, because explicit abandonment he had not yet lived. Being left behind, ignored, being treated as if I had never had value, that hadn't happened yet. And he still believed in the relationship he had built. He still tried to deserve recognition, even if it was just a look of thanks, a human gesture of respect. He hoped, perhaps in vain, that the boss would look at him and say something, "Thank you for everything." Meanwhile, the ox endured disguised looks of contempt. Workers, neighbors, people passing by saw the bullock cart in it. They see the marks of heavy work, accumulated dirt, heavy breathing, opaque eyes. Sometimes someone would say, "Poor guy, he's too tired." But in the boss's world, "poor guy" is a word that weighs less than a bag of coffee. His word didn't matter. His pain didn't show up on the profit balance. He was invisible in the calculation of earnings. He continued to resist the pain, his stiff back, his fatigued body. He no longer remembered a time when he was strong as a rock, carrying loads with easy balance. Now every step was an internal protest. Every morning, asking for water, food, care, he begged with the silence of his paws on the ground. But there was no answer. And then we reach the moment when the relationship has lost not only care, but the bond of trust. That invisible link that said our path together was broken. The boss no longer spoke to him. He didn't even caress his withers. He didn't even give a pat of recognition. Nor did it offer shelter when it rained. Nor did it guarantee rest when the day was heavy. The ox was no longer a partner. It was a disposable instrument, and he felt betrayal like a dagger in his heart. I felt like the promise of care had evaporated. He felt that all the sweat, all the effort, all the sacrifice left traces of bitterness in his mute chest. And in the silence of the evening, he stood there, looking at the horizon, remembering the days when he was loved, remembering the mornings when he woke up with hope. Now, there was only abandonment. If you who are watching have ever felt that you gave a lot of yourself and in the end were forgotten, if you have ever loved someone who turned their back, if you have ever had faith placed in those who had no return, then this story will touch you deeply. I want you to feel it with me. His pain is our pain. His abandonment is a symbol of so many damaged lives. And you, who have been with me until now, tell me, have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever felt like every sacrifice was in vain? Put in the comments, "Yes, I've felt it," or "Not yet, but I'm afraid to feel it." I want to see how many hearts connect with this story. And now, Let's move forward on this sad but true journey to reach the cruelest moment, the decisive abandonment. The next part will show how that ox, which had fought so hard, was left behind without fanfare, without explanation. Stay with me. The worst is yet to come. He had walked so many roads, won so many fights, endured so many silences that echoed more than any scream. However, nothing prepared him for that moment that would become the milestone of definitive betrayal. The ox first felt a change in the air. That bitter scent of farewell was already lingering. It was a light, almost invisible smell, but one he knew well. It was the odor of abandonment mixed with human coldness. That day, the sun hadn't even risen properly yet, and the ox was in the yard, waiting to pull the ox cart, his companion for so many years, towards the harvest. The boss had said he would send a more modern vehicle to speed up transportation. He listened to this with the silent loyalty that had always characterized him. He thought he would see a compliment, a nod of pride. Our old companion is going to get some rest, you deserve it. But none of that came. When the truck arrives, or his firm tires tearing up the dirt floor, he noticed the different rumble, that metallic sound that wasn't the wooden wheels hitting the clay. He felt a tremor in the ground. He felt the distant bark of dogs announcing strangers. He saw men getting out of the truck, carrying boxes, ropes, abruptly, without pause. The silence in the field became heavier, as if taking a deep breath of regret. The boss was there, watching, with a hard expression, without hesitation. The ox felt that something was wrong when the master walked to the ox cart, had the wheels fastened, and had the old ropes loosened. He stared in disbelief, trying to understand. The air seemed to freeze around his tired loins. The boss approached, looked at the ox, and said, not with tenderness, but with disdain, "This car here is no longer useful. It's no longer worth using like this. You're going to stay here. The truck will take everything from now on." The sentence was a blow, a dry thunder in the ox's chest. "You will stay here." He heard it. He felt it. The ox tried to move, raised its head, shook its hooves, but there was no gesture of mercy. The boss turned and turned his back. The ox saw the truck start, heard the roar of the engine, saw the dust rising on the horizon, saw the shadow that advanced, taking everything with it except him. The field was silent after that. The only sound was the hiss of flies that came to land on the abandoned ox cart. Flies crawling through the dry wood, landing on the old marks, the tattered ropes, the rusty pieces. The ox remained there, motionless, his body shaking inside, his eyes watery, his breathing shallow. He felt the mark of the rope on his neck. There was still the mark of the service, the sacrifice, the sweat, the past that the boss extracted from him day after day. He felt the burrs grabbing at his paws, the cold wind that seemed to mock him. The sun, which had previously warmed the path, now burned his already dehydrated skin, remembering each open wound. He felt fear, fear of the silence, of abandonment, of the emptiness that spread inside him. He was the same ox as before, but something had broken. Trust evaporated, loyalty turned to pain, sweat turned to bitter memories. He stayed there for hours or maybe days. Time seems to distort when sadness grips, not knowing if anyone would return. Hunger began to tighten. Thirst became an inner scream. He craned his neck, looked at the horizon, waited to see the truck return. But the only return was the wind blowing through dry stalks of grass. He felt his bones throb. The worm of torment crawled into his mind. I was forgotten. I was discarded, and there he remained, without shelter, without decent food, with rope marks on his neck, his body in pain, his legs shaking. The flies came and landed on his face. He shook his head trying to get rid of them, but it was in vain. The ox cart, the silent companion of so many trails, was there beside it, motionless, covered in rust, cracks, and neglect. Its locked wheels seemed to symbolize interrupted destiny. He looked at the car and saw his story sitting there, frozen in abandonment. Birds flew in the sky, actors oblivious to the pain. The tall grass swayed as if whispering, "He's left behind." The ox heard in the wind the silent accusation of ingratitude. "You are no longer useful." And from the back of his throat rose a silent lament that no one heard, because the pain of the forgotten is more silent than the scream of those who demand attention. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the big house, the boss continued his life without looking back. He carried the goods, received praise for his prosperous life, drank coffee on the balconies, supervised distant businesses. He no longer had time or feeling to look at the ox left in the field. And that's why that abandonment didn't have a dramatic scene of the villain tearing up the contract. It was more cruel for having been naturalized. He had decided, like someone choosing to change tools, that the ox was no longer useful. The field was empty. All that remained was the sound of the wind through the grass, of the dry leaves dragged on the ground, of the flies hovering around the ox's exhausted body. He bowed his head, let out a deep sigh, a sigh of slow death, of restrained giving up. In a corner of his soul, he remembered the day when he walked firmly and proudly, the moments when the boss said, "Go, my friend, let's go together." Now only the gaping void remained. And it is in this moment, in this cruel and silent moment, that the epicenter of true pain lies. The ox realized that he was no longer recognized, that it was no longer valued, that even after years of sacrifice, even after sweat and loyalty, he had been reduced to nothing. He no longer pulled loads. He was no longer seen. He was careless. And if you're following me now, maybe you're feeling this knot in your chest. Maybe you're remembering someone who discarded you. Perhaps you are recognizing in yourself this silent ox, given over to emotional abandonment, to merciful abandonment, oral, to the ingratitude of those who perhaps one day promised partnership. And that's precisely why this story keeps you here, because it resonates inside, hurts where it hurts, awakens compassion, revolt, reflection. If you have believed this story so far, leave a comment with "real pain" or "ignored," so I know how many hearts connect with this silent struggle. I want to see how many people are with me, feeling this injustice with me. Now get ready, because the next moment is even more intense. Let's follow what came right after this abandonment, how he survived, how the pain manifested in his body, how betrayal revealed itself in each dawn. Stay with me, because the story is still moving forward, and what comes next will tear you in half. Time didn't stop. The wind continued to blow across the field, shaking the dry leaves, making dust rise between the earthen furrows that the ox, one day, helped to open with its own hooves. But now he remained there, motionless. The body no longer reacted as it used to. Muscles that were once firm now sore. The thick skin marked not only by ropes and heavy journeys, but by an emptiness that no one saw. It was a screaming silence. Around, no one else passed. The workers were already moving with the truck. The young animals had been taken. And the boss, well, the boss was now looking at machines and no longer at oxen. He sought efficiency, speed, profit. The old ox cart was no longer useful. Neither did the old ox. And this is where we begin to understand what few see: invisible cruelty. The one that doesn't hit, doesn't bleed, doesn't burst on the outside, but tears on the inside. It is the cruelty of silent abandonment, of indifference camouflaged by progress, of betrayal that is not announced with words, but with absence. How many stories like this go unnoticed every day? How many lives are given to a cause, to a boss, to a promise? And in the end, all they receive is oblivion. The truth is that it's not just the ox. How many fathers and mothers have been left aside after years of giving themselves for their children? How many workers were laid off when they became sick or too old to perform as they once did? How many animals were exchanged for machines without even a farewell gesture? And we're not talking about simple replacement. We are talking about beings that feel, of souls who dedicated themselves, of hearts that, even without speaking, loved with gestures. It's the employee who dedicated 30 years to the same company, and was sent away without a thank you. She is the lady who raised her grandchildren and, in the end, was left in a nursing home. It's the horse that pulled the cart for a decade and is now tied up in a corner waiting for death to come. It is the ox who, like so many others, gave his all and received the cruelest of payments: neglect. What hurts is not just being left behind. What hurts is realizing that, in the cold logic of the modern world, what you are worth is what you produce. If it stopped producing, it lost its value. If you became old, weak, sick, tired, you became invisible. This is the true cruelty, not seeing those who were always there anymore. Ignore the history of sweat, the trajectory of struggles, the days of delivery. And you, who are here listening to me, maybe you recognize yourself in this. Perhaps you have already felt the bitter taste of ingratitude. Maybe you lived for someone who turned their back on you. Perhaps he gave himself away in silence, waiting for recognition that never came. If you've been through this, you understand what this ox feels. You know what it's like to wait for a look that doesn't come. You know the cold that lives where there was once human warmth. His story is sad, but it is also a mirror. She shows us how much we need to learn to value those who helped us, those who carried the weight for us, those who faced mud and sun at our side. It doesn't matter if it was an animal, a simple person, a distant relative. The value is in what is delivered, not just what is visible. Think about it. Was everything he gave worth nothing? Are so many years of hard work, so many open wounds, so many freezing mornings and scorching afternoons not worth a gesture of gratitude? Isn't it even worth a thank you, a dignified rest, a shadow to grow old with dignity? And that goes for all of us. When was the last time you thanked someone who helped you without asking for anything in return? When was the last time you looked into the eyes of those who are always behind the curtains of your success? The doorman of your building, the cleaning girl, the man who bags your purchases, the animal that accompanied you for a lifetime, the old father who now needs help even to walk. We live in a world that has become accustomed to valuing only the new, the fast, the productive. But we forget that behind every road, every achievement, every advance, there was someone or something who sacrificed themselves for it. And if we don't recognize this, we dehumanize ourselves. We become bosses of the type who shake and donor ox in the field. The ox is there alone, waiting for time to pass, hoping someone notices, hoping the memory of what he did has some value. He doesn't ask for luxury, does not require reward. He just wanted to not be forgotten. And that is the deepest pain, being erased as if it had never existed. Are we doing the same to people around us? Could it be that in our daily lives, we have turned our backs on those who supported us from within? Do we also have our ox carts thrown deep into our souls, forgotten, rusting in some corner of our consciousness? This story is an invitation, a call to see the invisible, feel what is behind what is not said. Understand that not all abandonment is physical. Many are emotional, silent, progressive. They start with a look that stops happening, a good day that doesn't happen anymore, a name that is no longer remembered. Invisible cruelty is everywhere. It's in the grandfather who is no longer heard, in the retired professor that no one consults anymore, in the worker who made history and is now a joke among the company's group, in the old dog that lives in the yard, ignored. It's in the bull in our video, yes, but it's also inside us, when we forget to be human with those who served us with their hearts. And this is a pain that needs to be exposed, not out of pity, but out of justice. If you have ever been ignored, left aside, forgotten, comment below, "I've felt this." Write this sentence and tell me what you experienced. It could be a sentence, an outburst. I want this video to be a space of memory and recognition. And if you've never experienced this, but know someone who has, share this story. Take this message to those who need to understand what gratitude really is, because there's still time. It's still possible to change. You can still recognize it. The story of the ox still continues. He's not dead. There is still life even in pain. But what comes after is even heavier. So stay with me. Because in the next moment, you will understand what happens to a being who has been forgotten, but who still carries within him the hope, even if small, of a gesture of compassion. Time had passed. Not much, but enough to transform what was silence into oblivion, and what was absence into condemnation. The ox, motionless, now felt not only the weight of loneliness, but the despair of insignificance. It was as if he had never existed for those who now went on with their lives as if nothing had happened. The field was still there, the ox cart was still standing, and the flies, oh, the flies were already more faithful than any human that passed through it. He didn't expect a party or honor, but I expected at least dignity. It was then that we realized, like a punch in the chest, even the ox cart with its creaked boards, its locked wheels, its frayed ropes, has a soul. A soul that keeps memories, that witnesses stories, that saw sweatfall, that saw firm steps and long journeys. A soul who saw the work being done in silence while the world rushed by. And if even an object carries history, how can someone look at a living being that gave everything and simply turn their back? This is not just the story of an animal. It is a faithful portrait of everything that we have become accustomed to ignoring. How many people do you know who gave themselves to the last ounce of strength and, in the end, were left in oblivion? How many men and women have worked their whole lives, given their blood, their youth, their backs, and today they are silent, in some corner, waiting for someone to ask if they are okay? This ox is not just an ox. He is your grandfather, who supported the house and today is treated like a burden. He is your mother, who sacrificed herself for years to give you an education and now lives alone. He is that teacher who once inspired you and today no one remembers. He is the bricklayer who built his house and today he is begging for a job. He is the cruel mirror of our haste, our lack of memory, our inability to reciprocate. Even the ox cart has a soul, but some bosses don't. And the soul, my friend, the soul feels. You feel when you are ignored, feel when it is turned off, feel it when it is used and thrown away. There are no words, no tears. The soul screams in silence. And what this ox carries now, in the middle of the dry bush, in the insistent noise of flies and wind, is the cry of everyone who was forgotten by those who promised care, for those who said, "We will go to the end together." They didn't go all the way, not even close to that. Can you imagine what goes through the head of a person who has only known work, who never complained, who never denied himself, who was always ready, even when hungry, even in pain? Now, lying in an empty field, he tries to understand where he stopped having value. At what point did it stop being useful, and even more cruel, at which point he became a nuisance? And this doesn't just apply to animals, no, this goes for everyone who has ever been used by someone. Valid for those who live, I had a relationship where I gave everything and it was exchanged. It's valid for those who worked for years and were dismissed via email. It applies to those who held up an entire family and were then seen as a nuisance. It applies to all of us at some point in our lives. The question that remains is, when did we start to accept this as normal? When did abandonment become part of the cycle? When did we start to believe that giving everything and being forgotten is the natural destiny of the loyal? No, it can't be. Because if it is, then humanity has lost the most beautiful thing about it, the ability to recognize. Recognition doesn't buy anything, but it heals. Recognition doesn't pay the bill, but welcome. Recognition does not rejuvenate, but it makes sense. His absence destroys. And that's why this ox's story needs to be told, because we must remember that every being who surrenders deserves a worthy end. It deserves to be remembered. It deserves gratitude, because a world that does not recognize sacrifice is a world that digs its own moral misery. You are listening to me now. Did you feel this pain? Did you feel that tightness? Then right below, Even the ox cart has a soul. Write this sentence in the comments if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of someone, if it brought up any scars. Leave it on record. Show that you feel it too, that you also see what many pretend not to see. And tell me, have you ever seen something like this happen? Have you ever witnessed someone who was discarded after giving everything? Have you ever experienced something similar? Tell us in the comments. I want to know your stories. I want us together to build this space as a memorial to the truth, the kind that society tries to hide. Leave your statement. Write, "I saw this happen," or "I was that bull," if you dare. And more than that, I invite you not to stop here. If this story moved you, go to the Stories That Hurt playlist. There I tell other stories as moving as this one, real, full of pain, of abandonment, of lessons. Stories that are not in books, but that live in the hearts of many people out there. Stories that we need to remember so that invisible cruelty stops being invisible. And if you want to be part of this, leave a like on this video. This helps spread that message. And subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't pretend that it doesn't hurt. Here, we talk about pain with respect, with truth. Activate the bell so you don't miss the next story. And share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Because if there's one thing I believe, it's that stories like this, when told from the heart, have the power to wake up what's dormant inside us. And sometimes all a soul needs to not die is to be recognized. So never forget, even the ox cart has a soul. But some bosses don't. But you do, you feel. And if you feel, then you still have hope.